Press the bell icon on the YouTube app to never miss a video from Newslaundry.
Hello and welcome to NL Interviews. I am Meghnad and I have with me today a very fascinating personality who has recently been in the news as well, and you might have seen a bunch of his speeches, interventions, and he keeps giving interviews to the media. I have with me Mr. Harsh Mander. Hello, sir.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, sir. How is lockdown going?
It's been, I think it's a trying time for all of us, but I've not been allowed myself to be too much locked down because of the homeless. I have to be out.
Right. But sir, you are like on the streets a lot. Like even before this, you were on the streets a lot. So how has that been affected because of the lockdown? Like just public dissent and
Yeah, I think that the lockdown, it's extraordinary, in fact, all over the world, wherever we have governments which have a tendency towards authoritarianism, they have used the lockdown to deepen authoritarian control and to try to discourage even more strongly or crush dissent. And I think India is very much in the same.
right.
And so I think that dissent, how do you come out? I mean, so much that we regard to be unjust has happened in the context of the pandemic and the lockdown and the ongoing injustice of the arrests and what has happened with regard to CA and
Yes.
with regard to Northeast Delhi. But I think all of us are struggling about how do we register our protests.
Right.
And so continuing to raise one's voice and critique, I think is one, and that I've in fact written even more during the time. I did about 15 articles, I think, quite obsessively once the lockdown started.
Right.
So I think writing, speaking, but and webinars and for whatever they're worth,
Yes.
but actually gathering. I mean, there's a certain energy and passion that happens, and India's sort of not had its George Floyd kind of response, because I was very struck by the fact that in the United States, in fact, the number of people who died was massive compared to India, but still people, when they felt strongly enough, came out on the streets. A huge amount of injustice has happened, huge amount in the period of the lockdown,
Right.
but people are still not on the streets.
Right. To the people who are watching this and do not know Mr. Harsh Mander, I'll quickly give a bio after that question. Uh, Mr. Harsh Mander is a human rights and peace worker. He's a writer, columnist, researcher, and teacher. He has formerly worked in the Indian Administrative Services, and he has served in states like Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh for 2 decades, right, sir?
Mm-hmm.
Then, after the Gujarat riots in 2002, he left service and he became an activist. And he has recently organized a campaign to raise awareness about the sufferings of families affected by hate violence across India. This is before the pandemic. It's called Karwan-e-Mohabbat, or Caravan of Love. Uh, Mr. Mander is also has a PhD from the Vrije University in Amsterdam, and he's the director of Center of Equity Studies. And he has written multiple books, the latest one being Partitions of the Heart, Unmaking of the Idea of India. So, sir, I just wanted to ask you right at the get-go, what, according to you, is the idea of India? So that we can come to the unmaking part of it.
Yeah, so I'm saying that the idea of India to me is something that was central to the spirit of the freedom struggle. It was something that is at the soul of our constitution. But it also is something that has a much older civilizational sort of salience uh, through millennia, and the idea of India is ultimately the idea that this is a country that belongs equally to people of immense diversity. That there are no conditionalities to belong. That you have to, you can worship, believe, eat, dress, speak languages, and have all the diversities of ethnicity, race, color, sexuality, whatever, and still belong equally. I think to me, the idea that it does not matter which God you worship, or if you worship no God,
Right.
whether you're rich or poor, whether you're this caste, that language, that this is a country that will belong equally to all. To my mind, that is at the heart of the idea of India. And when I did talk about the millennia of our civilization legacy, I do need to quickly acknowledge
Right.
that we have a very mixed civilizational legacy. We have, in fact, the legacy of caste and its brutality, and the inequality that was embedded in our cultural and religious systems over all these centuries. But we also had a respect for difference, which was very special. So we had the whole tradition of caste, but we always had a dissenting tradition, from Ashok, Akbar, Kabir, Nanak, the Bhakti movement, the Sufi movement. And it is this dissenting tradition that, to my mind, represents the true idea of India,
Right.
which was there in the freedom struggle and in our
So like
constitution.
as your book title says, partition of the heart.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate on that a little more?
Um, See, I think that I in a speech that actually has troubled the Delhi
Yeah.
police enough for me to be charge sheeted
Yeah.
in a murder. In that speech, I spoke about the heart actually, and so let me sort of bring that in. I said there that ultimately the struggle against a particular law, which was in this case Citizenship Amendment Act and the NRC and the NPR. I was saying that it is not really a battle simply about a 1,000-word law. It is something much deeper. It is precisely about what kind of country do we want to build or rebuild, and what kind of country do we want to leave for our children. And will it be a country based on equality, on solidarity, on love, or would it be one which is, in which some people belong and some people do not? And I think that, so I said that where will this question be decided? And so I started off by saying that it's not going to be decided in Parliament, partly because the kind of, even the political opposition as we see it today does not seem to have the moral courage to stand up for its beliefs and for what it's supposed to stand for. Uh, and it's not going to be decided, I said, in the courts and the Supreme Court. I think the high courts have a very special responsibility in a democracy. For a majority to not turn majoritarian, the protection of the rights of minorities is very centrally the duty of the higher courts, the High Court and the Supreme Court. And I have expressed my disappointment with a number of rulings and
Cases.
actions
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
Supreme Court. But I said we will still approach the Supreme Court because it is our Supreme Court, and I have continued to do so most recently in the context of the migrants, and
Migrant
before
workers.
that seeking the arrest of the cases against Kapil Mishra and Anurag Thakur, etc., for hate speech. So I said it's not going to be decided in Parliament. It's not going to be decided in the courts. I said it'll be decided by we, the people of India, who gave ourselves a constitution, made certain promises to ourselves. It's we, the people of India, who will ultimately have to resolve it. And we'll have to resolve it on the streets through peaceful resistance and agitation. But I said that there's a fourth place where most of all this question is going to be resolved. And that fourth place is in our hearts, your hearts and mine. Whether we have allowed the toxins of hate which have been propagated substantially by supporters and members of the ruling establishment, but it has a longer history. And so, have we allowed hatred to colonize our hearts, or do we, or is there, have we been able to find spaces for love in our hearts? So, so that's where I talk about partitions of the heart. Gopal Krishna Gandhi had somewhere said that we saw one partition in our land, but we're seeing now millions of partitions in our hearts.
In our hearts, yeah.
And so it's really
to the viewers who are watching this and have not been following the news, I'll just give some context about what Mr. Mander spoke about. So he has been named in a charge sheet by the Delhi police. This was based on a speech that he had given on December 16th, 2019. And he was addressing the students of Jamia Millia Islamia. This was a day after the police had raided the college and unleashed violence on the students. As of now, some 200 academicians, artists, activists have unilaterally come out and condemned this action. I'll just quickly read out a line from the Delhi police charge sheet as well for what the charges are. It says the manner in which so it says that Mr. Mander and other activists have tried to concoct a chronology and create a false narrative about the Delhi riots. Essentially, that is what they're saying. And they're saying Harsh Mander visited the site on December 16th and told protesters to not have faith in the Supreme Court and to fight their battle on the roads to get justice. That is what he had said in the speech, and he has just already elaborated what he actually meant by it. So the speech is available online, so you can go and watch it. I'm just going to move on and ask him about, sir, just wanted to ask what sort of support have you been seeing for yourself, and do you have any legal support? And what sort of what have you been hearing after this charge sheet was filed?
I have been touched greatly by the kind and degree of support that I've got from. It's been very reassuring. But and a lot of people have advised that I should apply for anticipatory bail and also keep a low profile for this period. To my mind, I don't propose to apply for anticipatory bail. I believe that this battle is really a battle for our democracy and for our constitution. And the only way I want to resist is to continue to work my work with those who are most oppressed and most in need, especially in this really difficult humanitarian crisis that we find ourselves, and to continue to raise my voice for what I feel is unjust. Right. And that I propose to be my only response to what the government has done.
Right. Sir, you have been a civil servant till 2002.
Yes.
And I think you quit after the 2002 Gujarat riots. I wanted to ask you a bigger sort of question about the bureaucracy. In a way that when civil servants see violations of civil liberty, as you saw then, even now, if you see, I think Aruna Roy also quit because she saw some violations of civil liberty and how government is not doing anything about it. And there's Kanan Gopinath more recently. We have an interview with him on newslaundry as well. So in cases like these, it makes one wonder whether there are like these handful of bureaucrats within the government who see it, and then the only thing they see towards it is it's resigning and speaking out. or are there people within the system who are also working? How effective is that versus how effective is what you did?
Yeah, no, I think that they're very fine people in government. They have been, and they continue to be, which is why we still hold together as a country. In almost 17, 18 years, when I worked uh, in government, I loved every moment of my time, and I loved it because I had the space and the resolve and the space to do everything that I believed in. And I also taught for a period in the Missouri Academy. And one of my early first lectures to the young civil servants used to be uh, about the right and the duty of a civil servant to dissent. I used to say that your duty is not to obey blindly, but to exercise your conscience at every stage and to dissent. And I exercise that right to dissent consistently through all my years in the civil service, and uh, a- and uh, and actually survived as a result. I mean, I had 22 transfers in 17 years of work, but that was a small price to pay. But otherwise, I was able, and I fought many battles within the government, and there is the democratic space for it. The 2002 violence, I think, for many of us marked a particular moment in the journey of our republic, where I saw, and some of us saw, that this was, you know, this that India was hurtling in a direction, and the direction is exactly where we are now, which is which is contrary to everything that our constitution promised. And I think that there's the huge spaces to work within the framework of the constitution, within the civil service. But if you reach a point where you believe that the state is actually itself uh, violating and subverting what is most precious to me, which is the ideas of justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, which are written into our constitution. Uh, Only at that point did I feel that there are many battles that I could fight within the government, but this was one battle that I had to fight
Outside.
outside as an independent citizen.
And but then one has to wonder, there are people like Ashok Khemka who have been transferred like a million times, and he still continues to work with the government and sort of try to change the system from within, right? How much freedom does a bureaucrat actually have to do that? uh, if that's not a very like stupid question, but
No, no,
like
no, no. I think a civil servant does have a significant amount of power.
hmm,
But the kinds of things that are happening now, I mean, so a civil servant could not change, say, the idea of the citizenship amendment,
right.
or the policy on the Ram Mandir, on Kashmir, or many things that we are so anguished about. But there are moments, and there are many moments, increasingly, when I wish I could have been within the civil service. For instance, uh, the extent of suffering that the laboring poor are undergoing during the lockdown is something that people in the civil service could have addressed, and they could have. I mean, there's massive stuff that they could have done. Or during the Delhi violence, in fact, I wrote a piece what I would have done if I was part of the government at every stage of the Delhi violence.
Right.
And the government may have been unhappy with an officer who did her duty as she was needed to do during the Delhi violence. But the law completely empowers the local officer to take a whole range of decisions, to intervene, when to use force, and how to take people to places of safety, to register.
De-escalate, right?
No, not only to de-escalate, but to protect and to lay the foundations for later justice.
Right.
And all your rescue work, relief work. There's a whole range of actually, when there's communal violence, there's the prevention, but once it breaks out, there are various R's. There's rescue, there's relief, there's rehabilitation.
But then what stops the current
Reconstruction,
bureaucrats from doing that,
yes,
doing what you described?
So that is a source, and I have expressed my anguish repeatedly, because there's nothing that justifies what civil servants are often doing now. I mean, to give an example, in the Karwan-e-Mohabbat, we had decided that we would go to every family. Uh, the level of hate that had got normalized in our society, and the impunity with which people were being attacked and videographed and circulated, I felt needed a response, and therefore I made a call for the Karwan-e-Mohabbat, where we decided that we would do 4 things. We would go to every home of any person who had been killed in lynching, and to go not as human rights workers or journalists or whatever, fact finders, but go like you would go to a loved one, and to say that you're not alone and that we care. And secondly, to seek forgiveness for what we have become as a country. To assure them, thirdly, that we are there in your battles for justice, and to rebuild your life, and we will tell your story. Now, in the course of that, and we've now made 30 journeys to 14 states, and I've seen a lot. The anguish, the agony, there are many things that caused enormous anguish. So on the one hand was the degree of cruelty that we saw, that has been unleashed, the normalization of hate in the social project. And people reached a point where people would say, I wish they just killed him. They wish they just shot him or stabbed him. But why this kind of torture? Why do they gouge out his eyes, smash his genitals? The kind of stories we saw over and over again. So you saw that, you saw the performative character of this violence, where they videographed it. It was very much like the African American lynchings, where it became like a public spectacle, this time using the video camera. But the role of the police, almost consistently in virtually every case of lynching, has been to register cases of, firstly, to not act to prevent the lynching, and often you had police persons actually present and allowing it to happen. But after that as well, what they have done in virtually most of the cases is to register cases against the victims, and make them the accused. So if you have been lynched in the name of the cow, then almost by definition you are the original criminal. And the crowd that lynched you is just sort of naturally provoked.
Right.
And it did a little bit of excess, but in a real sense, they were the heroes, because they upheld and protected the cow. So it is this complete turning on the head, and there it is officers who have registered cases, and likewise, the whole range of charge sheets that I'm seeing of the Delhi police is unforgivable.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. So
I know. So go on, sir.
yeah, no. So for instance, I went to the High Court a day after the violence started, saying that at least register FIRs against Kapil Mishra and Anurag Thakur and Praveen Verma, whose hate speeches, ignited the fires so badly. And the response of the police, despite Justice Muralidhar's very strong words, was that the time is not right for even registering FIRs. The time is obviously not right even now.
No.
But the time is right for them in the height of the lockdown of the pandemic, when even lawyers were not allowed to exit from their homes, for them to pick up, according to some estimates, arrest, detain more than 1,000 people from the local community, young students, student activists, young women, pregnant women, uh, activists, for instance, in groups like Pinja Tod, who just basically got together to protest the hostel curfew timings. Now, all of them have been
And it is now being presented as some sort of a conspiracy as well.
Yeah. And the police is building up a whole idea. So I'm saying all of this is actions taken by the police,
Right.
and any police officer of even elementary professional and moral sort of integrity would not agree to do this. And therefore, I think there's absolutely no alibi,
Right.
absolutely no justification for them not to do this. Likewise, there's absolutely no justification for the level of mass hunger that we saw on the streets post the lockdown.
Yeah, my actually next section was exactly about that, the poverty and the hunger that we are seeing. But my question is more related to how the masses are looking at this pandemic plus the issue of poverty now. I mean, on a surface level, there is a movement towards more charity, donating more to, like, say, something like a PM Cares fund, but that's a separate matter. But also like organizations and people are doing fundraisers and trying to help out people who are suffering. So in that sense, the pandemic seems to have brought people on a common footing against the virus as a whole. But I want to know from you how deeply the odds are stacked against the poor and vulnerable citizens right now, and also about how the perception of people of looking at the vulnerable and the poor has changed, if at all it has changed.
On the contrary,
Right.
I feel that what the response to the pandemic, the virus is of course indifferent to whether you're rich or poor, Muslim or Hindu, but it loves crowded, unsanitary places, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But what our response, the official response and the middle class response to the pandemic and its fears, has exposed us as being an extraordinarily unequal and uncaring society. Because please understand that India went in for the most stringent lockdown across the world, and incidentally in human history. I mean, there's no example of an action of this kind ever in human history. Even China went in for a lockdown for about 5% of its population, not for 100% of its population. Right. We, with 3.5 hours notice, went in. Now, one might argue that that this was
necessary.
No, if you argue that it is necessary, my point is that for whom was it necessary? Who did it offer protections, even at its best, in its best design? When the Prime Minister spoke to us the day he announced the lockdown, he said, please stay within your homes, work from your home, keep social distance, wash your hands regularly. Did he not remember that the large majority of Indians are in conditions, some don't have homes, a large number of them have homes where it is not possible, where 10 people are living together in a shanty of 6 by 8 or 10 by 10 feet,
right.
And they don't have running water. So my point is that even the design of the lockdown, even if it was best implemented, excluded from its protections by design the large mass of the people. So
why do you say by design?
By design, because it should be obvious to anybody who took that decision that was not possible
Hmm.
for large masses of people to take all of those steps which are required for your protection from the disease.
Right.
So
Right.
so we clearly chose a policy which protected the rich and the middle class,
Hmm.
which offered no protection to the working poor, and it placed intolerable burdens of suffering by destroying overnight both their livelihood and their food security systems.
Right. So mass migration happened after
Happened as
that,
a
and
result of
yep.
it. But
Yep.
but I was saying that in my opinion, it was an act of immense public immorality
Hmm.
uh, to have gone in. And there are alternatives. I've studied this very carefully. There are examples from other parts of the world, and we have, of course, Kerala, and we have. I would like to stress very much Dharavi itself, where I thought, where if you, there are ways that we could have dealt with this without, this completely draconian way of lockdown.
Right. Basically, very little thought seemed to have been put in into it. Or so. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, that's being very charitable. I mean, I think that uh, how can uh, how can a government have an amnesia
hmm.
about the mass of its
Okay.
poor? I mean,
Yeah.
and you have one mention by the Prime Minister in the course of his speech
Right.
that civil society should look after the poor.
Hmm.
I mean, that's not. I mean, yeah. So even if we felt we needed to go in for it, and just so that's one thing. But suppose
Hmm.
we had decided to go in for it, a at a time when there were just 500 infections across the country,
Hmm.
if they had allowed 1 week for people to go back, had facilitated their travel, there would have been very little spread of infection. People are going back now when there are lakhs and lakhs of
Hmm.
infection. So that several hundred times more chance of spreading the infection now. They, we, we've been saying, Prabhat Patnaik, Joycery Ghosh and I have written a couple of articles where we've said that just like the middle class was assured its salary while sitting at home,
Hmm.
every household should have been assured the equivalent of minimum wages, which we said, say roughly 7,000 rupees per household,
Right.
and a universal public distribution system free of
Like a
charge,
universal basic income sort of
yeah.
a model.
And plus universal food.
Yeah.
And again, many countries have done this, and we calculated wouldn't have cost more than 3% of the GDP.
Hmm.
But we did not. We chose not
Hmm.
to do all of this, and I think that what this is exposed. It's not just exposed our government. I think it's exposed because the middle class applauded this,
Yeah.
and we demonstrated our support. Did not. Why did it not occur to us how devastating this will be and is for working poor people in our country?
So, so you're saying the perception has changed the other way, as in like we have become even more insensitive as a population towards the poor now?
Yeah. I think that it has exposed how insensitive and uncaring we are.
Right.
I mean, see, everyone's so amazed at that there were 10 million migrants walking in the streets. Where were they? We didn't even know.
Hmm.
How did you not know? They're there at every
That's
turn
true.
of our life. I mean, they are the people who build our homes. They are the people who maintain and plumb and wire our homes. They're the people who clean our homes and our streets. They're the people who take care of our children, cook our food, serve our food, drive our vehicles. They're at every stage of our lives. They make our lives possible. But we looked at them as people who existed to serve us, but
Hmm.
as almost like a factor of production, but
Right.
not as human beings with full humanness. Uh, and once we saw them as potential carriers of the disease, we again saw them only as a body with a disease rather than again as a full human being.
Right.
Of course, incidentally, the irrationality of it was and the uncaring character of it was even worse because it was not we who were in the middle class who were threatened by our working people. It was we, the middle class, who was threatening our and endangering our working people
Right.
because we are the ones, people who could afford international flight tickets, who brought in the virus.
Hmm.
We are the ones who infected the working poor and not the other way around. And
Right.
yet we were willing, we and our government were willing to just throw the working poor to the winds and to the wolves,
Literally out on the streets.
literally out on the streets, in the vain hope that this would somehow protect us. And that
Right.
was enough for us. So I think,
So there is one more aspect to this. I think you can talk about this as well, about how, of course there is this insensitivity being displayed by a section of society, but then there is a smaller section within that which is
yeah,
trying to communalize this virus as well, where this whole the Tablighi Jamaat incident is one example of this, and how the coverage by the media after that was completely focused on something like a virus jihad, and how they are trying to spread it and everything. We saw like the similar incidents happening with other, like say for instance the Jagannath Yatra, etc. People were gathered there. There were other incidents involving even rallies where people were gathering. Why is there this selective sort of attempt to communalize this virus and introduce bigotry into a clearly large humanitarian crisis, which is
yeah.
affecting everyone
So
equally?
I think that it exposed again the character of our government, because this didn't happen by chance. It didn't happen by accident. It happened by very conscious design. At the start of the lockdown, within a week, it was very clear that many questions were being asked. What had you done to prepare? Why had adequate steps not been taken? And by focusing on this one gathering of the Tablighi Jamaat, I mean, there's no doubt that
It was a problematic gathering.
it was a
They were
problematic
also
gathering.
lying
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yes.
No, they weren't. They had taken permission. I mean, they had official
Hmm.
permission.
Hmm.
There were. It is important to remember that there were many other religious gatherings, Sikh and Hindu, even during that same period.
Yeah,
Please remember that Parliament was in session during this period.
that's true. That's very
Uh,
true.
uh, MLAs were being bought and sold in Madhya Pradesh during this period.
That's
So,
also
so,
very
so,
true.
so, so there was no particular sort of. I mean, it was not as if just the Tablighi Jamaat should have organizers should have been very responsible, and everybody else was free to do what they wanted. Statisticians tell us that if you they did about 25,000 tests at a time when testing was very low, of the Jamaat and all their contacts.
Hmm.
When you do that level of testing, you are going to have a high level
Right.
of
It's
positivity. That
focus testing of a certain
yeah.
group of people. Yeah.
So and then you had a whole outbreak of videos, all fake videos showing Muslims spitting into
Hmm.
vegetables and
Yeah.
fruit,
Yeah.
or coughing deliberately into people, and not a single person has been punished for those fake videos, although it is known now that they're completely fake videos.
Hmm.
So it was not by chance. It happened by design, and I think it is it shows truly the character uh, of of how dangerous, at a time when we needed to stand together in
Hmm.
solidarity, a government through its messaging, supported by large segments of the media, and its supporters on the social media, have used the height of the lockdown and the fear of the pandemic, at a time when the only chance of getting past this was by solidarity,
Hmm.
using it as an opportunity for even further deepening hatred,
But then
is terrifying.
what is the way out of this? I mean, I get your point about how there is this element of divisiveness that is being introduced by design. There are like certain, let's say loudmouth people who are just taking this opportunity to sort of divide people and divide hearts, as you have put it. But what is the solution to this? Like, how can we become more collaborative instead of divisive? Or is this just inevitable right now in
No,
this current condition?
it isn't at all. It isn't at all inevitable. Please recognize that this. I still underline that this has not happened by chance. It's not a few
Yeah,
loudmouth people who decided to air their bigotry. This was something that was centrally done through the official establishment. Through
but this wouldn't happen unless there is some inherent bigotry
yeah.
within sort of all of us, right?
No, so I thought about this a lot, and not about
Hmm.
this moment, but also the last few years. We are also a country where Mahatma Gandhi, at a time when 1 million people had died in Muslim riots, in partition, where Pakistan had been constituted, rivers of blood were flowing. My own family was uprooted with all of that hatred. To still say that this would be a country which would belong equally to all uh, required enormous courage. And please remember that the majority of Indians supported and loved Mahatma Gandhi. So let me say that in my understanding, all of us are constituted by both our best selves and our worst selves. And a leader like Mahatma Gandhi brought out our best selves. Leaders of the kind that we have today, and I say this loud and clear, are bringing out our worst selves. And I think that they have to take responsibility. It is their leadership which has bigotry was there, uh, but 2000 years of living with diversity and a tradition was also there.
Yeah.
The legacy of Mahatma Gandhi, of Dr. Ambedkar, Nehru, Maulana Azad was also there. And uh, and what was encouraged? So the leadership today, with its heat, it's we have some leaders who like the Home Minister, the Chief Minister of UP, etc., whose speeches really qualify for culpable hate speech. The Prime Minister is now, I mean, in Gujarat he used to speak in exactly the same language. Now it is a little more indirect and occasional, but the communal element is there. Kapdon se hum pehchanenge.
Kapdon se pehchanenge, etc.
So what are they doing? They have legitimized bigotry. Firstly, I think they've normalized bigotry. They have legitimized bigotry, and I would say one step worse, they have valorized bigotry. So you're a hero of the Hindu nation if you openly espouse and spread bigotry and hatred and lynch people. And those who speak about love and solidarity are anti-national people.
Anti-national, yeah.
Who have to. I mean, so they've succeeded. How do we respond? And to my mind, that is why I said ultimately it's a battle of hearts and minds. Your hearts and mind. Each of us have to choose what kind of country we wish to leave for our children. Do you want a country that is based on hate and division and fear, or one in which is built around love?
Right. That I absolutely understand. I want to come to the institutional aspect of this entire thing. And what I mean is institutional empathy, right? So we already spoke about how Delhi riots the Delhi police has behaved during the Delhi riots. There are other incidents, like you must have seen that case of P. Jairaj and his son Phoenix, who were brutalized and tortured and killed in custody, and that too for just keeping their store open for more than permitted hours. You have extensively worked with ASHA workers who have been mistreated as well. We saw like migrant workers being made to stand in a line and sprayed with disinfectants and just dehumanized in a lot of ways. Of course, the migrant crisis itself was a process of dehumanization. I want to talk a little about how there is there is a lack of institutional empathy, right? So people like you or someone within the bureaucracy, as you said, might have personal empathy towards the vulnerable people. But when it comes to the government or the bureaucracy as a whole, where does this go? And where does this apathy come from? What is the compulsion to behave in such a monstrous way?
I think when the history of India is written, and perhaps the world, this will be seen as one of the most cruel periods in human history. And let me explain. The reason is that we have now the resources many times over to ensure that no child has to sleep hungry, that no child should have to sleep under the open sky. It is entirely within our resources many times over to be able to do this, and yet we choose not to do it. These are public policy choices endorsed by uh, uh, the rich and the middle class and the elite of our countries. And we all have to collectively take responsibility for this. Likewise for the bigotry and hatred. Uh, so I've spent a large part of my life fighting for a just and caring state. I reached a point in my life when I realized that a just and caring state can only exist within a just and caring society.
Right.
And
Okay.
and the problem is not simply out there. It is here with us.
Hmm.
And therefore, I mean, everything is not hopeless. During this period of the lockdown, I was on the streets with my young colleagues from the second day, uh, trying to do what we could. I was deeply touched, even by my own young colleagues. Many of them, everyone was scared, everyone was frightened. I asked them, why are you still out? They were saying, we do have a fear, but greater than my fear is their hunger,
Hmm.
and that is why we are here. And day after day after day, they went out. We, and then across the country, we have Karan and Mohabbat supporters, and people contributed. The amount of money that people gave from every corner of the world, in fact, we were able to do around 10 million meals.
Wow,
Uh,
that's a lot. Yeah.
we sent about 56 buses as well.
Hmm.
And this is all possible because people cared.
Yeah.
But I don't want to, I mean, it's not just us. I mean, I saw large numbers of ordinary people, organizations, but much more than organizations, just ordinary people, not linked to any organization. A group of young people decide, somebody else decides. People, when the migrants were walking, I saw people driving up in their cars. Cars were stacked with food packets and
Hmm.
water, which
Hmm.
people were just handing out.
Hmm.
Um, you know, uh, Poorer people. I mean, I met homeless people who were trying to, even out of their little resources, help other homeless people so that they could. So there is also, I call this circles of kindness. I wrote about it as well.
Right.
And so I think that there are circles of kindness and circles of solidarity that I saw. But institutionally, as you say, uh, the institutional character and the character of the ruling classes in India today is one that is uncaring in the extreme, and I think that we need to acknowledge that, and be deeply worried about the face. I mean, the mirror that this moment has shown to us as a people.
Right. But like the institutional apathy, where does it come from? Like, is it just a reflection of just who we are, or what do you
I,
think?
I've written a book some years ago, which I called "Looking Away,"
Hmm.
and its subtitle was "Inequality, Prejudice, and Indifference in New India."
Right.
Uh, and I basically preoccupy myself precisely with the question that you're asking.
Hmm.
Why is it that we are a people who have such a capacity to look at suffering and injustice and then look away?
Hmm.
Uh, and somebody, one of the Holocaust survivors said, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference.
Hmm.
And it is the indifference, I mean, that we don't care. uh, when we I work with homeless people. One of the reasons I chose to start working with homeless people after I left the IAS was that if I have to live in this city, we see them every single day.
Hmm.
We see homeless children every single day, but we just see and look away, you know
Right.
and why is it as a society that we're able to do it? And I'm so glad that I chose to do this work, because I've come to know them as people. I be taking care of the children, and have working with homeless people. They are just as much human beings as you and I in every way, and the need to acknowledge our shared and equal humanity, I think, is something that we'll have to we'll have to do a lot to
Hmm.
fight for.
But then there is also the question. Of course, there's a need for apathy expected from the government. But then there are cases like, for instance, again the Tamil Nadu thing, where it's so difficult to sort of punish people who outrightly violate human rights, like especially officers and bureaucrats. Why does that happen, and what sort of protection do they get, and how is it possible to punish them better, or like just punish them in the first place?
No, it's basically, see, the law is very clear, but so we were looking that, there've been a huge number of custodial killings
Yes.
in Tamil Nadu and elsewhere,
Yes.
and encounter killings. Uh, there is virtually no example of a police officer who's been punished under the law
Right. Right.
for these custodial killings, which is called impunity.
Hmm.
It's almost, I mean, somebody was writing about this as a pandemic of impunity that we have lived with for a very long time. Impunity means that you are sure that you can commit a crime and you will not get punished.
Right.
Now, how does this happen? This happens because this person was produced before a magistrate. The law says that within 24 hours, a person who is taken into custody has to be produced before a magistrate. It is the magistrate's duty to confirm that the person has not been harmed and has not been tortured, and to ask the person if the person is okay, to ensure that it was only 24 hours. Uh, uh, now the magistrate did none of this. These people were bleeding, visibly, or almost dead by the time they were produced before the magistrates. But the magistrate still just waved his hand and allowed them. And this is not
Right.
unusual. This happens. Every single case of custodial torture and killing happens because magistrates. Then there are inquests later. Doctors don't do proper post-mortem reports. The magistrate who's doing the inquest of an encounter killing. Encounter killings are so obviously fake because where has the bullet entered, what is the story, etc. But it's not the lack of professional ability, it's the resolve to allow police impunity.
Right.
So the whole system uh, is geared towards uh,
Protecting their own.
protecting people who commit these heinous crimes
Right.
from within the system and within government. And many of us also celebrate this,
Hmm.
in the films we make and the stories we write and so on.
Right.
So I think that impunity happens because society wishes for it to, I mean, supports it.
Sir,
Uh,
so I have to.
so over and over again, what I'm saying is that it's as long as we believe that there's that horrible government there, terrible police persons, terrible this, it's not true. The police persons are drawn from the same society, and I've seen actually women and men of great courage within the police, people of high integrity as well. The smaller and smaller numbers, they fight very difficult and lonely battles. I worked with junior police officers during some of the worst communal riots when I was in Madhya Pradesh. And I have found that if you lead them in a certain kind of way, you inspire them with the idea of what is right and true and just, they support you to the hilt.
Right.
Same police forces. So the problem is in us and in our leadership, in the political leadership, in the social leadership.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think as a society, uh, when will the Indian middle class and the rich recognize that our moral center has completely collapsed and caved in? And if you don't recognize that, if you don't recognize it now, after the pandemic, and which has exposed us for who we are, we must, I keep thinking we must, when we rebuild, this time we must build back better.
Right. And to take that point forward, I will end this interview with one very simple question, which I think you would be the best person to answer. You have also like touched upon it before, but I want you to elaborate on it. Can you like very simply define what is dissent and how is it important in a democratic society?
So there are many things guaranteed in the preamble of our constitution. And I think that one just needs to, and the beauty of the anti-CA protest was that it centered around this constitution. And people, I saw working class people across the country reverentially reading. It speaks of 4 words: there's justice, there's liberty, there's equality, and there's fraternity. In Hindustani, it resonates more. So justice is in insaf, nyay. Liberty is azadi, swatantrata. And that is why azadi was so much a slogan. Equality is barabari, samanta. And fraternity is bandhuta, the idea that we're bound to and with each other. But just this particular business of dissent is part of our freedoms. And, what freedom of what, for what, this is something that we can keep. The slogan, our slogans through, isse azadi, iski azadi, iski azadi. But Roosevelt, I think, had given a very fine framework for this. He said 4 freedoms. The first was freedom of worship and belief. The freedom to dissent, the freedom of conscience, freedom from fear, and freedom from want.
Right.
As our 4 fundamental freedoms. Dissent is central to a democracy because it protects us from the hubris of an executive which believes that they can do anything, take any decision, and they'll get away with it without explaining to us why, what rationale, and so on. Our Prime Minister is perhaps the only one in the world who has, through this entire pandemic and lockdowns, wherever lockdowns have happened, who hasn't addressed a single press conference. And not even answered questions from people. Dissent is critical, as I said, even for a civil servant who works within the government, for each of us to exercise our conscience about what is right and wrong, and to state it without fear and without being criminalized for it. And I might be wrong, you might be right, but it is only with a free exchange of views, fearless exchange of views, that what is right, what is good, what is just, what is kind, can be protected.
Right.
So I think dissent is critical. It's at the core of democratic living.
Thank you so much, sir. And to end, I would like you to sort of recommend maybe something for our viewers to watch, read, anything that you are currently reading, or any of your books. Please feel free.
It would be a little vulgar for me to recommend any of my own books. So let me talk about maybe some of just some of my favorite films and books which speak to me for these times.
Please go
ahead. My favorite film is actually a film, Japanese film by Kurosawa, called Red Beard, and it's about actually a doctor, a young doctor from a urban rich background, whose his father insists that he has to go and work in a village and learn about life and reality. And I think that's a film I recommend to every young person. And a book that I would recommend is Alan Paton's Cry, the Beloved Country. It's an incredible book about both hatred and division and the possibilities of solidarity and healing. And for the times, for this particular moment, do read John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, which is a story of the Great Depression. And I think that we are hurtling towards a situation very similar So it talks
Right.
about what happened to the poor during the Great Depression, and what hunger did, what joblessness did. So these are some that I would recommend.
So those are great recommendations. Thank you so much,
My
Mr.
pleasure.
Harshmander, for talking to me, for spending time and answering some of my questions.
My
And to
pleasure.
those who are watching, this interview will be available behind the paywall. So if you want to watch the full interview, you will have to subscribe to News Laundry, because when the public pays, the public is served. And when the corporations pay, the corporations are served. When Patanjali paid, you know who was served and you know what they sold. So please subscribe to News Laundry to watch this full interview. And thank you so much for watching.